So hello, folks. We're here with choreographer, performer, educator, a number of things, company director, Molissa Fenley, who created and performed the beautiful work that you just witnessed, that we premiered. And we're here to have a conversation with Molissa about her work, about her thoughts, her relationship with Ryuichi Sakamoto, and whatever else might come up. So welcome, Molissa.
Thank you. Thank you.
So your work, I just, one of the reasons I curated the artists that I did is not just that they might have had some kind of working or personal relationship or inspiration with or from Ryuichi Sakamoto, but also because, I wanted to kind of work with artists where I didn't have any expectations. So maybe, can you tell us a little bit about what your inspiration was for these pieces to start?
Certainly. Well, I started working in the studio with the idea of birdsong. I had listened to The Revenant recently, and the soundtrack of the film has birds singing in it. And it's like so extraordinary. The music is quite ominous, and yet there's this life going on around. And I thought, well, that's really kind of interesting, rather than think of working with composition of Ryuichi's, that to actually use birdsong might be very interesting. So I just listened on YouTube to find some ones that you could use royalty free, and found the one that I used. I just would have it playing in the studio. And I just thought about the idea of the so-called other world, or the world of nature. Oh, excuse me, I'm really sorry about that. And how important I think that was to Ryuichi. I just saw his incredible piece, Kagemi, in New York, and it was really beautiful to see the footage of him when he was in the Arctic, wandering around and recording the sounds of the glaciers and everything. And then at the end of that came up with a recording called Out of Noise, which actually I used for 2 dances in 2014. But anyway, I love the sound of just this nature coming into the room. And I thought about my relationship to my dancing, which is I'm nearly 69. I've been dancing for a very long time and making my own work for a very long time. And in the years of making my own work, there's like a vocabulary that has evolved that I think is particularly unique and idiosyncratic about my body. I choreograph on my body, and I just started working with things that I felt had something to do with nature, had something to do with longevity, something to do with time passing, the progression of time, that there's this feeling of constantly being in the present as the piece evolves and progresses. It's just like moment to moment to moment. Nothing is really repeated, or there's no sense of going back. And going forward is just sort of, that time will pass and that you'll go forward into the future, but there isn't a sense of knowing what the future will be. And I wanted to make it a short work. One of the things that I spoke to you way back about when you asked me to do this piece was that I always thought it was really interesting how Ryuichi was so interested in the fact that John Cage had made the 4-minute, 33-second score on the day that Ryuichi was born, I think is the story, and that was important to him. And I thought, okay, I'll make a piece in 4 minutes and 33 seconds in silence. And I thought, no, that's a little corny. I'll use the bird song. And I'm not sure that I cut it off exactly at 33 seconds, but that was the initial thought. So to pay homage to Ryuichi's desires, I think that he was really quite enormously influenced by Cage, as we all have been, as the modern era has been. And And so I wanted to do that as an homage to him. And it's really interesting how the piece just sort of evolved. It made itself, so to speak. One thing followed another. I liked the idea of stillnesses. I like the idea of things that are hard to do, that the balances are difficult for me. They may not be difficult for every dancer, but they're difficult for me. And that effort I found important to be a part of the piece. And so it kind of just evolved. And when I had my assistant Ashley come in to film me, we thought, okay, we'll have two looks and see which one we like better. And so I had a white dress and I had a red leotard with a pair of black pants. And we called it Red Blackbird and White Dove, so that we could tell the difference, you know, when we just looked at the footage later without having to open the footage, but to know which it would be. And we ended up liking both so much that I asked you if you would mind putting both on. It's amazing, it's exact same choreography. And yet the import of it, or the ambiance, the thing that you come away from is really different.
Yes.
And I asked a lot of my friends, I said, well, what do you think? And they all said, I like the red bird, or I like the white dove, or I like both, or, you know, no one could really say, oh, this one is a better, for this project, this one is better. So we decided to put both. I had originally thought that the white would be more interesting because white is a traditional color of mourning. Mourning the fact of Ryuichi's life, and yet celebrating it. And yet then it seemed in a way too formal, and I didn't like the way my legs were covered and that you could see what my legs were doing better with the pants. But then I liked it too. So anyways, so they both became the piece.
Because for me, your choreography is somewhat abstract, but also very real. As you were saying, you know, that tension of you trying to find your balance in certain moments, you as a performer, certain movements or poses or gestures being more difficult than others. That tension between the abstraction and the corporeal, you know, reality, the humanness of it is something that I love. And it's something, and the reason I pointed out too is because I think that's something in the all of the things, the interviews, the essays, the books that I've read from Ryuichi himself, a lot of his thinking and his philosophy, I think, pointed to this between nature and technology, between you know, everything that humanity in its sort of like conceptual and industrial and intellectual, you know, and political national fervor, as the case may be, you know, trying to control things. But nature ultimately, sooner or later, has its way. There's this wonderful moment in the documentary Coda about him where he talks about how ironic it is that he loves playing the piano, but he's an environmental activist, because what it takes to construct a classical piano is so artificial, and it's Western culture, high Western culture, bending nature literally to its will in a, you know, an idealized permanent way. But of course, nothing's permanent, and as every pianist and piano tuner, piano manufacturer, you know, all the folks at Steinway and Yamaha will tell you, no, that thing falls apart sooner or later. There's a point at which it's just not going to work anymore. And I love
also,
you captured that tension.
Yeah, I think there's also the great beauty of the fact that he is playing the piano at, you know, the hand of the composer playing his piece on the piano is a really, really beautiful experience. I like that better than a musician playing his music, because in the actual hand of the composer, or in the case of me, the hand of the choreographer, there's an absolute immediate transition from brain to body. And when you work through a dancer, or you work through a musician, of course, there's that moment of translation. And I like that too. But for this particular piece, I thought it was really important that I dance it myself. And and I put all of my dances on several of my dance company members so that, they're there and they can dance them as well. But this one I have not. And I feel like I'd like to dance it again when I'm about 85 and see what it's like.
That'd be great. I would come to the show. I'm coming anyways, just because it's your work, but yeah, I would absolutely love to see that at any age. I think, it's interesting what you're saying about the creative, the creative artist being the performer, the vessel for it as well, and that immediacy, because he actually talked about that as well, because he was very insecure about his singing voice, and he wasn't sure about it when he went solo after Yellow Magic Orchestra broke up, and he finally settled into this idea of the composer voice. He stopped thinking about himself as the singer, instead as the composer, simply performing the composer's music, voice, keyboard, piano, whatever, right? And then that like relaxed him, and he was able to perform better and enjoy the performance. I don't know if I'm curious if you maybe want to unpack a little bit more, kind of anything else about what it means to perform the choreographer, in that way.
Well, the amazing thing about performing is that it's the flesh and blood at that moment in time, from whatever you're feeling in the nerves, or, you don't feel well, or the floor is the wrong kind of surface, or the tech isn't working or something. There are all these things that can sort of get in the way of an experience. I am finding more and more that I really like the one-on-one experience. I just came back from a residency at Yado, which was absolutely fantastic. It's a place that artists are invited to go for about 3 or 4 weeks, as you like. There's a studio, and I had a beautiful dance studio. And I thought that the nice way to meet the other artists would be to give a showing every day. And so I showed a piece that had music by Vijay Iyer that I just did in 2023, this year, very brand new. I made a piece in silence, and then I would show the Ryuichi birdsong piece, and I would do them in that order. And by the time you would get to the birdsong, it's like those 3 pieces back to back had taken all of us, both performer and watcher, into a deeper and deeper concentration. And then by the time you're watching and listening to the birdsong, everyone is sort of being transported. And it was such a great experience to do that. And I'm finding that kind of experience is harder and harder for me personally to get into from a theatrical venue where the lights are on, and there's a separation between audience and performer. I'm finding the one-on-one, or at the most I would have 2 people in at a time. And it was just, it was very moving how there was this ability to all go someplace together. It was a very communal feeling. And I really loved that. And I'm trying to find a way, how can you repeat that in a more theatrical setting? Is it possible? And I think it probably is. It really asks for everything to be kind of, in a way, perfect. Like, there isn't a question with the music, or there isn't a question with the lighting, or as I said, the floor surface, or, as soon as you do a piece in silence, invariably everyone's coughing, and, it's just, they can't help it. I mean, that happens to me too. And when you're in an audience and suddenly there's a piece in silence, it's like, oh, your stomach starts growling, or, whatever. It's like, it's an interesting thing. And I think I'm going to be working on that in the next couple of years to figure out this extreme intimacy, how to bring it into the theater. It's such a precious, I think, beautiful thing.
I think Ryuichi himself was doing a lot more smaller scale and intimate works himself in the last, I think, phase so to speak, of his career, the last 10 to 20 years, from all of his various electronic and electroacoustic collaborations with other musicians in small settings, either small sort of alternative venues or site-specific work, doing that where it might not have been one-on-one, but it was, obviously very overtly designed for intimacy, for, a sort of micro, scale experience. So yeah. And speaking of all the production details, obviously we need to talk about your actual working experience with Sakamoto. So tell us the story. I've heard parts of it, but kind of, if you could recount it for our audience. It's a wonderful thing, I think.
Yeah. I was invited. Well, I invited, or somehow Ryuichi and I got together. And I think it was probably at that time my manager thought that he was a really interesting composer. And so we wrote to him. And at that time, he was working with a British gentleman, and I cannot remember his name, but he was a person that we worked through. And came up with this idea of making a full evening length dance work called Esperanto. And so I made a scrapbook of ideas of what would go into this piece. And all of the titles that came up on the album later, like Idyllic Penguins and things like that, Ulu Bantang, Boat Song or something like that, those are all from the pictures of things that I sent. Idyllic penguins are from the Arctic or Antarctica. It's a type of penguin. So anyway, these words he used as a means to come up with some kind of compositional work. And so he would send it to me. And if I remember correctly, I think he sent the entire thing at once, which was really great. This is going back, this is 1985, so I'm not completely sure about that. But I do remember listening to it and starting to work with it. And there was a part that we all really hated. It was just, I was working with a group of 4 others. So there was a small dance company. There were 5 of us, 5 women. And we called it, talking on the telephone underwater, because it was a sort of garbled thing. But anyway, in having to work with what he sent, and that was my premise, that pretty much whatever he sent, I was just going to say, okay, fine, because I think that's interesting. I think it's interesting as a choreographer to be pushed into, I don't really like that. It doesn't really quite go into what I want to do, but then suddenly it arrives and, okay. So I had to work on that section really hard. And of course, it became my favorite section. So that just goes to prove that, it's I've always loved to collaborate with other artists. And one of my premises is always, whatever they send, fine, just accept it and go from there. And it will invariably push me to make new work, to make something, find a new expression of something, new way, either a new ideology or structure or methodology of putting something together. And so, of course, that was the case with that. So we got to Tokyo. It was being premiered there, but it was a wonderful impresario of that time called Shozo Tsurumoto. And he was the producer. And this, I believe, was in Shinjuku, in a high school auditorium or something funny. It was like an odd sort of place. And so Ryuichi showed up with Yazkaz, the wonderful percussionist that he has worked with over the years. And they started to play, and it was just like, wait a minute, that's not what you sent. We had made this entire 45-minute piece, and I think he was finished like in half an hour or something. And also things that had been, the basics were there, but something that had lasted for 3 minutes was now only lasting for a minute and a half.
Oh my God.
So we had to go back and explain what had happened. And we ended up performing to the tape with he and Yazkaz performing live on top of the tape. And so that was a really, really great experience. And had a wonderful time making that piece, and performing it was really great. And then we sort of, parted ways, or, whatever. And the next time I wanted to work on a piece was 2014. It was from the Out of Noise album that I was talking about, two of the cuts from that. And I just called up, I remember calling John Zorn because I had heard sort of through the grapevine that Ryuichi was sick at that time, that he had, I believe, throat cancer. And John was keeping in touch with him, and he was feeling better. And all of a sudden he was performing at the Stone. And unfortunately I missed that, but John gave me the address and the telephone number of his company in New York. And so I called them up, or wrote them, whatever it was, and asked if there was a royalty situation to use the music. And they said, no, absolutely not. Just go ahead and use it. So that was really lovely. And then your thing came up. So So this is going from 1985 to 2014 to 2023. And I'm actually now working on a very new piece to his music. And I cannot figure out what the name of the music is. It's called 2012, 2010 or something like that.
That's from his, would that be from his, it doesn't sound like the right year, but his last album that they released on his birthday about 2 months before he passed. Each track is the date he composed / recorded the piece. Maybe it's one of those.
Yes, it's a very, very beautiful piece.
Yeah,
it's about 7 minutes long, and I've made 4.5 minutes of it so far. It's another piece that has some kind of feeling. And one of the things that the birdsong piece had for people as they were watching it is this sort of like otherworldly idea. And that's why I decided to call it In the Garden with Ryuichi, because initially I had called it In the Garden for Ryuichi as an homage to him. But after having danced it several times in the studio and performing it for other people, everyone says, well, he's actually there, that there's a kind of ghost figure that is there. And I would say in the piece that I'm making now, that is even more pronounced. Wow. And I wouldn't say it's necessarily him. I think that it's just ancestral figures, or it's just figures. It's other beings seem to be there. It's very, very interesting and kind of scary and weirdo. But I'm really loving making it. And so I'm going to premiere that, I think, in New York in January.
I want to go back to the Esperanto experience for a second. I'm just curious, maybe a little bit more, if you can remember kind of what the production was like, the performing of the piece, because I think it was wasn't it also recorded for television as well? Yeah, I'm just curious kind of what on the ground, if you can share anything else about, what
it was a huge production, and it was really nerve-wracking. I mean, both being a choreographer and then dancing in the work. It's just like, as the choreographer, you're asked to come outside and look at the lighting and decide, yes, this is working, this is not. And then as a dancer, you jump in and you do it with everybody else. They had 5 or 6 cameras on dollies that were just hooked up at the bottom of the stage, and they would go across the stage, and like they're coming from every possible angle. It was kind of amazing. The lighting was really intense. It was by a gentleman from New York named Gary Mintz, who worked with it was almost like their moments were almost like there was a strobe. It was like it would go like a flash, and then it would go back into its normal. So there were these things in the piece that were very high tech, and we as dancers are on stage the entire time. We're wearing these costumes from Jean-Paul Gaultier, which I had been in Paris recently, the year of or the year before, and went to his studio and asked if there was something I could have. And he said, sure, look around, whatever you want. And so we found these things that were actually supposed to be, I guess, some kind of shorts, but they looked really weird. So we ended up putting our arms through them. And so it was like this sort of like arm thing with a big billowing where your body should have been, or something sort of come out like a big wing. And then these beautiful skirts that were just like a wraparound skirt. And so they were flying all the time. So there was like this whole energy of material, and 5 dancers, 5 women. And it was a really wonderful dance company. I loved all those dancers so much. They were Sylvia Martins and Scotty Mervis and Elizabeth Benjamin and Jill Diamond and myself. And it was a really, really fantastic group. When the Esperanto was just recently either re-released or released for the first time, I'm not sure what, but I sent a letter to everybody and said, that this had happened. And so, I mean, it was just really fun that all those years later, certainly it's being looked at again. It was really nice. So yeah, huge production. I don't think we were ever able to do it in that way again with live music. That was the only time we had live music. From thereafter, it was always the tape that he had sent.
So you did tour the piece a little bit after that?
Yeah.
Nice.
I remember we went to the American Dance Festival when it was went through South America. We did it in Europe, a couple places. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So finally, I'm just curious. Any other thoughts about Ryuichi's legacy, about him personally? Just curious what else, how he sort of lives in you, or how you remember him. In addition,
it's interesting. I mean, I really didn't know him very well. Of course, we met when we were in Tokyo and doing the performance, and he was very, very kind. And of course, after the performance, the girls are screaming all over him, and and he shuttled us away into this car, and when we had a nice dinner afterwards, and he was very kind, very gentle. I've always had he's just like been one of these people that I think is a very lovely person, and I'm thankful for that I was able to know him just a very little bit. His music is constantly surprising to me. I've always loved his music. Some things better than others. The Yellow Orchestra period for me was not so interesting, but it could be now. I don't know. I should re-listen to it. But I really have enjoyed all of the soundtracks he's done, like The Revenant or for Babel, or there's so many of them that he's managed to do. And of course, when he was in Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, everybody was so excited about that we had known him. And but all in all, I think what a lovely, lovely person, and how lucky we are that we all knew him a little bit, or that his music has touched our lives. I'm so thankful for that.
Yeah. Me too. And thank you so much again for participating. Really love your pieces, the piece / pieces,
Yeah.
And I know our audience will as well. So for those of you who are looking for the rest of the pieces, remember you can see it on our YouTube channel. Also fineartscenter.com or fac.umass.edu. Where can folks learn more about your work, Molissa?
I have a website, molissafenley.com, and Molissa spelled M-O. That's all you need to know, molissafenley.com. And I keep that very updated with things that are coming forward. All my work is visible on that, on Vimeo. A list of works, a list of press, and all that stuff is there.
Great, wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me for the project. It was really super, super fun to do.
My honor, my pleasure. Thank you.